Hey y'all. Today I just wanted to talk about what it means for me to be a completionist, why I'm a completionist, and how being a completionist has shaped how my gaming experience, how I interact with games and all that fun stuff. And the main reason why I really wanted to talk about this is that nowadays games are like $80, and then if you toss some DLC on top of that, that game will easily cost, $100 plus. And that's too darn high, all right? I'm not going to spend $80 or $100 on a game most of the time. Or if I were going to do that, that game had better be exceptional, it better be polished, it better be, an exceptional experience, right? That's just how I feel about it. When I started gaming, just as a kid, my dad was really the one that bought a lot of my games for me. It was very, very rare that I would buy a game for myself because, obviously I was a kid. I didn't have a job. I didn't have income. If I got money, it was like money that I happened to find on the ground or money that I got for my birthday. So I wasn't buying games very often. My dad he's a very loving person. He bought my family, my siblings, a lot of movies. A lot of times I would spend my free time watching movies. And there was a certain point in my life where he started buying me consoles and video games. Whenever I got consoles and video games, that was like an extra. That was a luxury. And games have always been a luxury. They're not a necessity. You're not going to die if you don't play a game, right? When I would get games, a lot of my games were one generation behind. So when I got like the PS1, the PS2 was already out. When I got the PS2, the PS3 was already out. When I got the 360, I think the Xbox One had already been out for a while. So I've always been one generation behind. And I've kind of, I'm still in that habit for the most part. And, a big reason for why that is that a lot of new games are just a bit too expensive. And many games, I feel like, and this is just kind of an opinion thing, a lot of games that come out are not very polished. They're not very complete, especially nowadays. It's very common that a game will get shipped or that you'll download it digitally and then it'll have all these bugs or it'll have all these problems. And then the developers are depending on patching those problems out at a later time. So it's very common for a game to release and then people to be disappointed in it and it has to be fixed, months or maybe even a year later, right? When I got games as a kid, it was really important that I finish the game. And I got really, so basically what would happen is I would have a game. And I had a lot of really good games as a kid. I had Metal Gear Solid 3. I had Spyro the Dragon. I had a lot of the Lego games like Lego Star Wars. I had Final Fantasy 9. I had, I played a lot of Pokemon games as a kid. I had to be, I wasn't getting a lot of games all the time. Maybe I got like 3 or 4 games a year. And bear in mind that this was at a time when if I bought a video game, it was very common for last gen consoles. Like, let's say I have a PS2 game and the PS3 is already out, right? A lot of the games would be like $20 on sale. So you could grow, and that was also back in the day when $20 was worth more, right? You could get a lot of games for $20. That was, that was common. And so I wasn't getting games all the time. And I would play my games over and over. There was a lot of replayability to the games I was playing, like Super Smash Bros. Brawl. That was the very first Smash Bros. Game I ever got to play and own. And I put hundreds and hundreds of hours into that. Pokemon, I had Pokemon Gold, I had Pokemon Heart Gold. And those 2 games alone, I probably put like 600 plus hours into them both, right? So whenever I wanted a game, it was a game that I really, really wanted. And once I got that game, I would play that game to completion. I would try to get all the collectibles. I would try to get all the achievements if there were achievements. I would do absolutely everything in the game. Obviously it had to be fun, and a lot of the games that I got were really fun. And so I was really compelled to play the full experience of that game, because when you're a completionist, you get that sense of like when you play a game that you've experienced everything there is to be experienced in that game, that you've experienced everything the developers wanted you to see and play. And it's a excellent feeling, at least for me. I always feel kind of like this sense of accomplishment of playing a game completely through. And when you play a game like that, you become more selective, because that's definitely a time investment. If I'm gonna spend, even $20 or $30 on a game, I want it to be good. I want it to last a decent amount of time. It could be a short game, but it should be a definitely a good experience, you know? And if I could encourage you to complete your games, I would do so. Now, of course, that comes with the caveat that the game be worth completing, because there are a lot of games that are not worth completing because they either don't respect your time, or they're not very fun, or not fun enough to complete. So it really is, there really are just a specific few games that are worth completing and that are designed to be completed. Like, for example, Lego Star Wars, or any Lego game for the most part, right? Those games are developed and designed in such a way that they kind of encourage people to 100% them. There's a lot of like, oh, here's the mini kit detector. This thing will increase your studs. This will help you unlock the characters. There's a lot of like, for the most part, you can see what needs to be done to complete that kind of game. And it's not a very hard game to complete either. The Lego Star Wars, or just all of the Lego games, are very completionist friendly. And those are the prime example of like a perfect completionist game. Now, some of the worst games to complete, most of the worst games to complete are usually multiplayer, because the achievements that you can get for a multiplayer game are usually ridiculous. It'll be something like get 1 million KOs or something like that, right? Like just an absurd number that's like you're gonna spend hours upon hours upon hours just working on that one achievement, and it's just not going to be worth your time unless you really love that game and you're just playing it for the fun of it. That's different. But there are so many games where like certain achievements are just really not fun to get, or they're just a little too difficult to get, or it's just a waste of time. The worst achievement, the worst thing you can do with a game is not respect the player's time. If you just put like some sort of challenge in a game, and it's just going to take a time investment, basically grinding, that is not good game design, in my opinion. That's just my thing. Because first of all, people get older, right? And when you get older, you get more responsibilities. And so it becomes a privilege, it becomes a luxury to have that time to sit down and enjoy a game, even for like an hour or even more. When you're a kid, when you're a teenager, or you're in school, you have that spare time to play a game, and that's really the prime time, I think, for video gaming, is when you're a kid. And I think that's why, to some degree, why a lot of adults don't play video games. To some degree, some people just don't grow up with it. But I think a lot of it is just responsibility, especially for men, because men's responsibility becomes taking care of your spouse, taking care of your family, doing your job to the best of your ability, trying to earn money for the family, And with all of that responsibility, there becomes less and less time for gaming. And that's normal. That's natural, right? That's just how life is. And so with that limited amount of time, free time, you have to be more selective with your games. And when a game does not respect your time, that's kind of like a slap in the face from the developers. At least, that's how I see it. Now, there's this other element when it comes to completing games, that like, whenever I complete a game, I gain this deeper appreciation for that game. Like, I think the latest game that I was able to complete was the Final Fantasy 1 Pixel Remaster. And when you sit with a game and you complete it, you get all the achievements, you do all the story, you do all the side quests, all that fun stuff. You get this deeper sense of what that game is. You get a deeper appreciation of like the time that the developers put into the writing and the world building, and crafting the abilities and the spells and the attacks and all that stuff, or the enemies. You gain a deeper appreciation for all of the hard work that went into making that game. You can check out my Steam page if you wish. I put it on my channel. You can see the games that I complete. And for each game that I complete, I have this deep sense of, maybe not deep sense, but a sense of connection to that game. If I look at a specific game, for example, Owlboy, right? That was like one of the first few indie games that I got to play on Steam. And I can remember like the time in my life of when I played it. I was still in college. I was probably like my sophomore year in college. It gives me a sense of like, oh, I remember where I was in that time of my life. I remember, what I was going through in that time of my life with each game, and it's this nice little, I guess you could say, like memory vault, or like a time capsule thing, where you look at the game and you get a sense of like, oh, I remember playing this game. I remember this spare time I had playing this game. It brings back nice positive memories. And when you're completing games, you're really putting a set amount of time in each game. It's not like for example, if I was not a completionist, I imagine what I would probably do, and I assume that this is the standard, right? You get a bunch of games, maybe like 5 or 10 games, and then you just kind of play whatever you want to when you want to, and so you kind of jump between games, and you may enjoy the game, but I think there's a sense where like the memories become a little bit, I don't know if fractured's the right word, but when you're jumping from game to game to game and you're not really finishing it, you're just jumping around. I feel like it's harder to get a sense of what each game is, and you don't really connect with the game all that much, because I guess there's always that sense of like, oh, well, I can always put this game down and go play something else. When I complete games, I really sit with that game and I really enjoy it for what it is. I think what I'm trying to get at is that like the completionist mindset really compels you to sit with the game, enjoy it, just really engage with it mentally, and engage with the world, engage with the characters and the story. And again, it causes that deeper appreciation for that game because of the time investment and just, kind of taking the time to enjoy it more. Now, to sort of like bring this video back to the beginning of where I was, at the beginning of the video, I really would encourage people to think a little bit more about completing games. Now, I don't want this to become like a rule or like a crutch to say like, hey, you have to complete your games, because it's not very fun to play a game and then you find out it's not very fun. If the game is not fun, why bother, right? Just as Reggie Fils says, right? I would encourage you to complete games that are fun, that you really enjoy. And it's really a sense, I think what I'm trying to instill in people is a sense of intentionality. I think when you're intentional about what kind of game you want to buy, what kind of game you really want to play, what kind of game you really want to sink your teeth into and really sit with for weeks or maybe a month, yeah, that really encourages intentionality. And that, I think that also increases the sense of fun and enjoyability of a game. I think when people buy, 5 games at a time or more, I think there's a sense of like you have looser connections with those games, and maybe it kind of detracts from the enjoyability of them, because it's if I just have it in my mind, because this is usually how I play games, I'll usually play 2 to 3 games at a time, and I have this deeper sense of like, oh, I get to play this when I get home, or oh, I can't wait to see what happens at the end of this story. There's a, because it's more intentional, I really just think it's like more enjoyable, and it's also just, I feel it's also just better for your finances. If you're being intentional about the games you're playing, you're not going to be spending $50, $100, $150, and further up. You'll be able to save that money because you're not just buying games willy-nilly, right? And I think that's, especially for like older people, like saving money becomes more and more important. I would, like, me personally, I would not like the idea of having a big gaming backlog. I've talked about gaming backlogs a little bit. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a gaming backlog, but I would encourage people to try not to get too big of a backlog, because in that sense, that's like money that's sitting in a gaming computer library, and it's untouched, and it's just kind of wasted money. At least that's how I see it. Unless you're really thinking like, oh, I'm gonna play this within a month, something like an intentional time frame, like, oh, I'm gonna play this soon, and it's actually soon. You have a plan of a specific time. That's different. But if you're picking a game and you're like, oh, I'll play this someday, that's that's less intentional, and chances are pretty good that if you buy a game thinking, oh, I'll play this someday, you're probably not going to play that game, maybe even within the year, maybe not even at all. And at that point, it's kind of burnt money, at least in my opinion. And in this day and age, we want to be more intentional about how we're spending our time. We want to be more intentional about how we're spending our money. We want to be good stewards of our time and money, is essentially what I'm getting at. But that's more or less what I have to say about this whole concept. Let me know what y'all think. Do you like to complete your games? Do you prefer to play them, just kind of more, less, just, I guess let me know how you play your games or whatever you thought of this video, whatever it is. I do like to read comments. I like for people to engage. I feel like it's nice to see what other people think, because very obviously not everyone is a completionist. And I don't want everybody to be a completionist, because if everybody was the same, the world would not be very interesting. It's a good thing that we're all different, that we all have different mindsets, we have different perspectives. That's a good and fun aspect of life. I don't want everybody to be a completionist like me. If it helps you out, yeah, sure, go ahead, be a completionist. If it helps make things more intentional and more focused in your life, go for it. But if it's like if it becomes a burden, like, oh, I can't buy a game unless I complete it and all that stuff, if it becomes a burden, that's no good. Last thing I want to do is tell people you must be a completionist and that's the only way to game. That's the last thing I want to say. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something good out of this video. Hopefully you got some thoughts going or the gears turning in your mind, right? But yeah, thank you for being here. If you feel so inclined, if you want to help out my channel, I would deeply appreciate if you liked it or commented or, subscribed. All of those things help the algorithm and it helps me to be discovered by new people. Only if you feel like it. If you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. I just appreciate you being here and listening to my goofy little opinions on the internet. But again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Y'all have an excellent day, and I will see you all later. Take care.